afternoon, and good evening. My name is Phoebe Lee with NVidia, and I will be your moderator today for Mentor webinar. Before we started, I would like to thank you for signing up and spending the next hour with us. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into Mentor for Maya, which is an industry standard rendering engine now available directly from NVIDIA with new features. We're happy to have Peter DeLup, who is our Mentor product manager at NVIDIA, to talk about what you can expect from the new Mentor in terms of product highlights and licensing policies. Followed by a live demo from Barton Cowboy, who is our Mentor product designer at NVIDIA, to demonstrate the new features and capabilities in real time. Before we get started, I would like to let you know that all lines are muted throughout the webinar. So if you have questions at any time, please enter them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering all questions within 15 to 20 minutes of the end of the webinar. As we'll be demoing the software today, if you encounter any lag issues, the recording will be available to you after the webinar via email. With that, I'm turning over to our presenter to begin. Peter, feel free to take it away.
Okay. Thanks, Phoebe. Let me see if I can get this going here. First, I've got to share myself. Right. Okay, let's just do this. And we'll just start up same slide. All right, thanks for joining today. The first thing we're going to talk about is who we actually are. So those of you who are not familiar with the Professional Solutions Group, or what we like to call ProViz these days at NVIDIA, that is an umbrella group that produces GPUs and rendering software. Some of our offerings are not related directly to rendering. For instance, we make CUDA, and as you can see, sort of right in the middle of all of these products is Mentor, which has a very tight coupling with the MDL SDK and vMaterials and MDL in general, as well as Iray, our other renderer. All right, so I'm sure that most of the people who are in this call are going to be familiar with what Mentor is. Here's some historic examples of where Mentor has been used in the film industry, and I'm sure that if you look at the slide, you can see a number of examples of maybe one of your favorite movies. All right. So the key thing that we're talking about today is that Mentor is now directly available to users from us. And Maya has, the default renderer in Maya has been Mentor since about 2004. As of July of last year, in Maya 2017, you may have noticed that Mentor is not included any longer. And NVIDIA has taken ownership of the Autodesk integration, which we are continuing to produce. If you go to a web page on NVIDIA.com, and I'll give you the URL later in the discussion, and you can look it up pretty easily, you can get it directly from us as a free download. And it's free to use to render single frames, and we'll get into that in a second. If you want to buy licenses, we're offering it for $295 a year per computer, or $995 a year for 5 licenses. However, if you get a Pro card, and what that means is a Quadro card or a Tesla card from us, and almost all of our Quadro and Tesla offerings from the past couple of years, going back to Fermi class, if you're familiar with that, are included in this deal. You can get it for $95 a year, or $325 for 5. If you are part of a bigger outfit, you can get deeper discounts after you go to 50 licenses. Okay, so Mentor for Maya is now available directly from us, the creators of Mentor, and this is allowing us to do things that we've wanted to do for years. So we're attempting to improve our workflow in ways that, frankly, we were prohibited from doing in the past, largely because we were tied to an annual cycle of Maya releases. We've been in beta since last February, and we had over 1,000 users testing our version of Mental Ray for Maya. And one of the things that we've been concentrating on very heavily is, as you might imagine, GPU acceleration, thanks to optics, which, if you were looking carefully at the previous, or one of the earlier slides, optics is an SDK that we offer to customers for developing ray tracing applications. So we also use it internally. So we are our own customer as well for optics. Okay. So last December, we offered the first version of it. We released it to the public. That free version is available to use in any active Maya session for everything but sequence rendering. As we wanted to maintain Mental Ray as the renderer that you know and love from the past, we wanted to make everybody, give access to everybody to use it while working within Maya. Okay, but what this means is that it's free for rendering individual frames within Maya. But at the same time, you can also use all cores and all processing that exists in your workstation. We don't limit you in terms of resolution or quality or the hardware that you have. Production rendering requires a Mental Ray license. So if you're doing sequence rendering or you're rendering in a headless way using Maya Batch or from a command line, that's going to require a license. So likewise, if you're rendering outside of Maya in standalone or using the satellite mode of standalone, that will also require a license. So basically, whenever you're doing anything on a rendering farm, you're going to need licenses to render.
Hey, Peter, I just got some feedback from the audience that they can't hear the audio very clear. Would you mind speaking a little bit louder?
Sure. Let's see. Is this better?
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me
much
now?
Better.
Okay. All right. So, what's the same in Mental Ray from when we took it over from Autodesk? Well, we are striving to provide full historic functionality for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. And that means that any scenes you've created probably in the past 12 years, especially if it was rendering nicely with Mental Ray, should be promotable to the current versions of Maya 2016 or 2017 using the Mental Ray plugin. Also, when you're using it, we don't want to, as I said earlier, we don't want to inhibit any user from doing, say, look dev. So every Maya user has access and can completely edit their scenes and do whatever tuning they want to do free of charge. So what's new is a much more interesting story, frankly. Our development schedule, as I said before, is now decoupled from Autodesk and from Maya itself. We're supporting 2016 and 2017, but we're also including Mental Ray standalone, which is now no longer a separate product. So when you go to download the plugin, you'll also get the standalone. The same license that you would use for doing production rendering using the plugin will also run the standalone version, so it's interchangeable. It's no longer a separate purchase. We are definitely striving to take Mental Ray from Maya into the future, and a couple of the things that we're developing and are now available, for instance, is a much more interactive workflow using progressive rendering in the viewport. And then, of course, the big feature that we are really concentrating on is GI Next, which is our next generation global illumination solution. It's definitely easier to use. I think anybody who's used it will tell you that as compared to FG or the older versions of GI that we offered, it's a lot easier to set up. It's typically 2 to 4 times faster if you're rendering only on CPU. And if you have GPUs, it's GPU accelerated, and you can expect up to about 12x the speed over earlier versions of global illumination. The other key thing to know, though, is that if you have older scenes that were set up with FG, switching it over to using GI Next is a very simple matter. It really takes little to no effort whatsoever. There's probably a few things that you want to do to bring your scenes forward into the latest versions of Maya, but it'll render very well, and it'll look pretty good. Here's a quick slide that'll give you kind of a brief overview of the kind of performance increases you can expect with various GPU offerings we have, from the lowest Maxwell QM2000 cards all the way up to our current top offerings, which is the Pascal P6000. And these are all of these bars are compared to the speed that you can expect from a 14-core CPU, a typical 14-core CPU. So we know what metal ray is, or most people know what metal ray is these days. What you might not be as familiar with is NVidia iRay, which is a newer physically based photorealistic renderer that we've offered for about 6 years. iRay is definitely geared towards a slightly different market. It's definitely more intended for the design industry. So if you're an industrial designer or an architect, or maybe you're doing interior design visualization, iRay is probably the renderer that you want to use. It's got a much quicker learning curve, and it's also, as I said, physically based, which makes the results that you get from it highly predictable. There's a lot of fidelity between the imagery that you get and what your final product would be. In fact, we use it often for doing light analysis and interior design, lighting, etc. It's available in plug-in form for Maya, Max, Cinema 4D, and Rhinoceros currently. Metal Ray, on the other hand, you know it, you love it. It's designed mostly for the M&E industry. It's a very flexible renderer. It's got a lot of different modes to it. It does things that iRay doesn't do, including things like tune shading and design for visual effects and particle systems and that type of thing. Well, what's the connection between the two of them? Well, at the moment, the most prominent connection between metal ray and iRay is MDL. Both of them support MDL materials, and that means that you can author MDL materials or take them from one of our sources, including the V materials package, and reuse them between renderers. And then we have some adoption from some outside companies too, but we won't get into that at the moment. All right, well, after this, what's next? And the answer to that question is a lot, with your help. So Metal Ray for 3ds Max, we're targeting to ship a plugin for Max right around the time that the next version of Max 2018 ships, which is later this spring. And our goal is to rebrand it, and especially important to us is the idea that we can align features in the Metal Ray that exists in Maya with the features that exist in Max. We want to continue to improve our MDL workflows, and we want to continue to provide standalone and satellite support for both. What's new with iRay 2017 in Metal Ray? Well, that's a little bit more obscure. We have a lot of things on deck, and we can't really talk about some of those things at the moment, but I think you'll be interested when the time comes. Expect to hear announcements from us coming very soon into the spring. The iRay plugins are, we don't need to get into this very much, but we are continuing to evolve them individually. but we're also looking at expanding their scope into other DCCs as well. Okay. Well, in the spirit of helping us to help you, here's a plea from me for those of you listening to get involved. Go ahead and download either iRay or the mental ray plugin, and here are some links where you can do that. This slide was not displaying exactly correctly, but I think, Phoebe, we're going to offer this video later, and we may be able to offer more detailed information than what's here. But I think you can see the main URLs. The download link is the same page as the one that I showed you earlier. But also, I encourage everybody to go and register for the forum. There's a lot of information there. A lot of that information goes back many years, so there's a lot of knowledge that's might be of interest to new users, but also to seasoned users. And if you want to get involved in our beta program, and please, we encourage you to at least apply. Please do. And the first thing you do to get into our betas is you go to the forum, you register, and then you send an email to the link that you see there, the email address, and we will promote you.
Hey, Peter,
Yeah.
I saw some participants were asking if you can share the link in the chat box. So I think we can do that while Bart is doing the demo later.
Sure. That sounds like a great idea. Yeah, absolutely. Here's some more benchmarks, and here's a kind of a nice typical example of how GI Next enhances a typical outdoor scene. You can see a lot of secondary illumination. I don't really have a pointer here, but I think you get the idea. Having said that, let's why don't we get right to the demo? So let's see, what do we do to switch over to Bart? Okay, hang on a second. Guys, stand by while we switch over. We have a little bit of an audio switch we have to do. All right, go ahead, take it.
So hopefully everybody can hear me, and judging on what the mic situation was when you were listening to Peter, I tried to put my mic a little bit closer to my mouth, so we'll see if this works. Good, you can hear me. One person said, okay, now I'm going to try to share my Maya screen here. Okay, so we're going to start with a basic plane. So hopefully everybody can hear me. Now, when you install Mental Array for Maya, you should be able to load it up, as everybody should be familiar with, but just in case you don't know, you go, again, that was Windows, where we can get down to the plugin manager, and here we have Maya to mr.mll. That's the Mental Array plugin. You can see where we install it from NVidia. We install it in the NVIDIA Corporation directory. Hit load, and if you hit auto load here, the next times that you come into Maya, Mental Array will be automatically loaded. Okay, so this particular, what I'm showing here, is what we're actually running in a beta test. We are beta testing the 1.01 release, and with that release, we have also a shelf up here, which I will be making use of during this demonstration. So here's basic plane sitting in Mental Array, and now we can create lights from Mental Array using create lights. And then down here are a variety of Mental Array lights. Now, people who are just loading Mental Array may not know that we added a direct create light little submenu here. And for example, we can create a physical area light. I also now in the shelf have a quick way to do that by just hitting this area light here. Now, the number one biggest thing that we want to talk about at first is interactive Mental Array in this viewport here. So here, as you may all know, I can just render a quick, oh, in fact, let me do it in Mental Array. I can render a quick plane here in mental ray, and it comes into the current. This is a current frame render, what we call a current frame, right? Which is what happens when you hit this little button up here. Now we can do this rendering of mental ray right in the viewport window. So now what I just showed you here, render mental ray, instead of viewport 2.0, it's to viewport 2.0. Here's mental ray. And you can see that we're actually rendering mental ray, this plane in mental ray. This is using the default lighting. So if you look at common here, maybe some of you know that one of the things is if you have no lights in the scene, there's an automatic enable the default light if I turn that off. And then now there's no light on that scene there. And so this is my quick switching back and forth between mental ray and the viewport 2 toggle switch I have here. So again, enable the default light. But if we put a light in, for example, the area light, and we have a quick way to do that here. So I'm going to put the plane in, and I'm going to click on the area light. And now you can see we basically kind of have interactive lighting working here, where I now have this area light. I'm going to move it around. And so now you can see I have this area light that I am moving interactively and rendering in mental ray. Again, if we wanted to see it in polygonal form or however our viewport is, we can click to the viewport. We can see that there. This is the area light lighting up the plane. Now, again, there's quick ways to do this. There's another little one I want to talk about making object lights. This is the quick way to do it. And of course, if we did create, we would create lights. It's the same thing as doing create lights. Object light. We can actually create an object light now. I'm going to load a little scene for this. Scene, objects. Okay, so here we have a scene where we've just got the default light sitting in the scene again. This is actually a mental ray render sitting in here. I'm going to turn off the mental ray in the viewport, and I'm going to select these objects. So you'll notice I don't have to select one object. I'm going to select all of them. And I'm going to apply that object light to everything I've selected. And there, I've done that there. And I'm going to change back to viewing this with mental ray. And now I've got object light sitting in my scene. And here you can see I am going to change color. Yellowish, greenish with a less saturation. So now I'm actually rendering with mental ray the object lights that we just saw selected. And this is taking a lot of samples of all these different object lights automatically. Just so you know, we now have a way of automatically globally throughout the whole scene of setting the lighting quality. You don't have to go into each separate light and set the sampling of this. We just have an overall lighting quality knob here that you see them. If I had started higher, then it will come out with higher quality on each iteration of the progressive render that we're seeing. If I set it lower, we'll have faster interactive rendering, but it will take a little bit longer to resolve or converge. So we covered creation of an area light. We covered creation of an object light. Another thing I'd like to show is that we can immediately assign a material. So I'm going to go back to the viewport, and here, for example, the material that is this back thing, we can immediately assign a Mila material to it just by clicking on the Mila button. And now that is a Mila material that we have in here. And this material, I'll just kind of make it a little bit more tan-ish color here. And I'm going to turn on the mental ray render, and you can see that we're rendering here. Now, digging deep into the Mila material is something that we could run another webinar on that's because it would cover a lot more time, and we have a limited time. This particular webinar, we're kind of doing an overview of features. And so one thing I just want to make everybody know is that there are a variety of base components here that are selectable for the Mila material. And people often say, how do I make my big material? So you select a good base component, and then typically you add a glossy reflection clear coat to it. And you get most of what you have had in a Mia material as well. So here I've got a reflective. It just inherits my color that I used for my reflective base component, and now I've got some reflective shininess sitting in my cube here. So again, digging into the Mila material and the layers significantly is something we can talk about in a more specific, focused webinar. But as I said, it's just important to know that you have a variety of base materials, including this nice skin one when you're doing skin called diffuse scatter. And then you add clear coats on top of that to get some nice skin look. But that's kind of your first foray into looking at Mila materials. Now, I'm going to load up another scene to talk about GI. So here we're going to load up this scene here. It's a simple scene, so I can demonstrate a few concepts for you. Again, a current render would look like this, where we're going to render. Now, this scene has no direct light in the scene. It is lit entirely by the emission of an object above these two objects. So that object, let me just reset my... I have a little bit of a ceiling in here, so I got to adjust this just right. There we go. All right, this object right here is a Mila material with a Mila emission layer on it. So it's a yellowish tint with a bit of an intensity of 4. And if we did not have any GI in it, so I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to turn off, just make sure that my default lighting is off. This is a lot of work just to show you that that would end up being a black frame, because all that you are going to get here is the reflections off of your surfaces that have reflections, and you're not actually getting any other direct lighting like the direct diffuse lighting that you get. You're just getting reflections of whatever is in the scene, which is this emission surface. So now I'm going to actually add GI next, and I'm going to do this actually in the renderer window. So now we're going to get global illumination. GI, by the way, GI stands for global illumination. GI next is our global illumination mode, which is much simpler. We basically control it with a quality setting here, and you can see now this is having indirect light come from this object and going and lighting throughout the scene. So there are no direct lights in this. This is only indirect lighting of the scene. And now this has been a popular thing in the past to get kind of cheap-looking, physically realistic kind of effects by just putting an emission surface around and being able to light with that. It's a common technique for different tricks used in production these days. You will also notice that if we have this thing called Show Advanced Settings, and you can get more advanced settings, but in basic mode, we like to say that the quality knob you want to mostly work with is overall quality. The diffuse quality itself can be controlled with indirect diffuse quality setting here. So if we increase that, for example, you will notice. I'm going to check with Peter on something. Do you see any banding, or how is that looking from the? Some of our the scenes that we are showing, the quality of the scene may not show all the way through the conference. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can hear me at the moment, but yeah, you might be seeing a little bit of compression artifact if you were looking at the screen that I'm looking at that Bart's working from, it's actually quite smooth. It looks a little chunky in the webcast. We apologize.
All right, so one other thing I wanted to talk about with global illumination, or GI Next, is controlling dray steps for scenes. This is a little bit tricky because if you look here, I'm assuming I can see my cursor over there going across the glass ball. I'm just checking on Peter's screen, and I think you can.
Yes.
So there is light you see down here underneath this sphere. When our eye looks at this floor, this is a diffuse surface, and rays then bounce through this glass surface and hit this diffuse emitting surface. It's not a light, remember, so we don't use caustics for this. What we need is an indirect form of caustics. And to control that, I put on my advanced settings. And this is just something everybody, I think, likes to learn about at first when they're using GI Next. And that is, there's this little flag here called post-diffuse glossy specular interactions. Well, this is a visual look at exactly what that means. So you are seeing transmissions from this diffuse after my first post-diffuse means my eye is looking at this diffuse surface right here where you see this, and then going through two transmissions before it gets some indirect light from another surface. So if I turn that off, and we relook at that light, you will notice now that the light, basically what we call indirect caustics, is no longer coming through the ball. Where is this useful? When do most people run into this issue where they I got to use some post-diffuse transmission? Is if you have a skylight that is not actually environmental light. It's just skylight coming through. And a little off script. If you have skylight coming through a glass window of some sort, and hitting a diffuse floor, you would have to have that on. Now, this isn't actually coming through a window. I just wanted to kind of give you an idea that there's skylight back here. It isn't an actual light. We turned it on just by hitting sky up here, and we've got the skylight bouncing around through some corners to come into this area here. Again, going through this surface down to here if I enable post-diffuse glossy specular interactions. This next rendering you will see will have that indirect light now coming back through the glass sphere. Reflections, a little bit trickier, right? And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's also, if we look in this area, Peter, can people see this cursor right where I'm putting the cursor? Right, here's the ring object here.
Yeah, we can see it.
So if we look at this is the diffuse surface we're looking at, and it could bounce off the inside of the ring and hit this diffuse surface here. So if you pay attention to this area here, I'm going to set some things a little bit faster for us. And I turn down that reflection to 0. You will now notice in this corner here, I no longer have the diffuse that hits the reflective surface and goes back up into my diffuse surface. So again, if I turn this on, or if I increase, all I need is one reflection here to get that reflection back around. Okay, so I'm going to move to a different scene here. So that was hopefully giving you a little idea of the power of the glossy and specular interactions after you hit your diffuse surface. We call them indirect caustics. Just so you know, that regular caustics are still in mental ray. So if it comes directly from a light through, for example, a mirror or a glass to a diffuse surface, you still use caustics. I'm going to open scene.
Okay, so while you're doing a switch, I'm going to take this opportunity to answer one of the questions on the questions tab. This one's coming from David Allen, and David is asking, is this GPU acceleration and are the card types involved? And the answer is yes. This is a fairly beefy machine. I think that this is I don't think it's a Xeon dual core system, dual die system. It's a single.
I will do that in about a
And I'm sorry, what was that part? I didn't understand what you said.
You're leading up to the render resources thing, which I will show them in a bit. Maybe I should do now as you're talking about it.
Yeah, why not? Just pop it up for a second. So obviously we're using this machine to do a webcast, so we're kind of stealing some of the power of it. But if you look at this resources panel, you could see that it's got dual Quadro 24 gig M6000. So this is a pretty powerful machine. But you're not going to get these kind of results with a lower end machine, perhaps. But at the same time, this is how many? I can't read this from here. How many threads is that?
The threads aren't huge. They're like 12 threads, 6 cores. 6 cores.
Right. So this is like a single i7 machine.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And but it is dual GPU. A lot of the I think if I remember, if you opened up that resources panel, you have one of the GPUs off. You're using it for doing interactive viewport. Any case, this is a heavier scene, so keep your eyes on this one and see what the interaction is. I'm going to go back on you.
All right. One of the things to know about is if you have advanced settings, this helps your interactive speed if you set the number of subsamples coming back to you. Now, interactive speed, meaning when I have something of, as my scenes get more complex, getting my first pixels up to my scene, we can subsample it higher and get those first subpixels faster. So now I'm going to turn on my renderer mental ray, and because of those subsamples, I can get to this. Now, this is also still direct lighting at first. We didn't add the global illumination into this yet. So it comes in a little bit more pixelated, but it has a better response to my hand. I'm going to take a look over it. Yes, they can see me moving it around. Okay. So as your scenes get more and more complex, of course, this could slow down a little bit. And we have a nice little feature for controlling GNX in the viewport that I wanted you to see. And by the way, since we're rendering all of these pixels, we might as well show all of these pixels. We had a gate around it, and we were rendering all those pixels. So what I wanted to show you is this setting here, which we call blend. Now, in this setting here, if you get bigger and bigger scenes and the interaction is slowing down a little bit, you can still start working with a fairly large scene in the viewport 2 mode. So now you'll notice, I'll move this a little bit over here, that as I move the camera around, I'm still in viewport 2, so it's getting the fast response of viewport 2 no matter how big my scene is. And then when I let go of my mouse, I'm blending in the actual mental ray render. So this makes kind of moving things around, moving your camera around fairly quickly, even in fairly large scenes, and then be able to blend in over time. And you can choose what the blend duration is and how many blend steps per second. We pretty much leave this. This makes it feel smooth, and it's just how long you want to take that blend in. This is a little bit of a shorter blend window. When I lift it up, it'll come in a little bit faster. And so you kind of adjust your blend duration with your subsamples to give you something that feels nice and smooth as you're working.
Hey,
so
Bart.
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt for a split second here. Just let that render for a second.
Okay.
one of the things that you'll notice if you're watching the webcast is that there's an awful lot of banding going on in this frame. And again, we got to apologize. This is a compression artifact from the webcast itself. But I'm looking at Bart's screen, and that rendering is high resolution. It's on a 24-inch monitor, and it's
1380 by 832. This is fairly
right,
big.
and it's completely smooth. That's the key. There's none of the kind of nasty-looking artifacty stuff that you're seeing in the webcast on the actual render. This is actually a what you see is what you get render. All right. Back to you, Bart.
Okay. So this is just something for those people who are downloading a look at it to know about. Now, how do you get to this setting? Just I kind of went to it fast. I thought you might want to. We'll step back again. It's renderer, mental ray, and in these options here, you'll see this. Now, again, we have when we bring up the toolkit, there's a quick setting to get to the settings here. It brings up that same box, and what we're talking about here is the blend setting. This has some other things, too. You'll notice that I have a highlight here. That's because I say show wireframe on selected objects. If you don't like that, if you prefer only to see the wireframe while you're moving the camera on in blend mode, and then the rendering completely without that highlight, that's the checkbox to check for that, and you can see then that disappeared while we were actually rendering it. So there's a couple of useful switches that we have here. This little heads-up display down here is shown with this box here. So a couple of useful things for you starting out and using interactive rendering in the viewport. Now, as we had talked about, GI itself is controlled through here. So this scene is not actually doesn't have any GI in it yet until I turn on GI next. So if we just take a note of kind of basically, this has a lot of lights in it. So it was lit fairly well with direct lighting, but now we're going to add indirect lighting, and it's going to get brighter as the light bounces around the room. For those of you who are interested in understanding the render and looking at the kind of like diagnosing and looking at a render report, just hopefully you know, for example, that there is a little window called the output window. And does that show up? Yes, it shows up when I do it here. And that kind of tracks and gives you the render report. Here's your progressive frames being rendered out. There's a little bit of GI information coming up there. Now that, and it doesn't let me put that window away. Okay, now it lets me tuck it. All right, so now we'll notice that there is this scene is brighter. It's a little softer as this renders more accurately. Comes out to a very nice quality, especially the subsurface scattering sitting on that bust back there. Basically, the control is the quality of the GI next. Those are the indirect samples. The quality within any given eye-ray, and you can think of all the eye-rays that we're putting all across the scene as this overall quality. So we could actually increase the quality here of the overall scene. Yes.
I think we've lost your audio.
Hello, check.
Guys, stand by for a second. I think we might have to.
How long ago?
No, that's it. Shit, I got kicked out.
You got kicked out too? Hello?
I can't hear you. Yeah, we
Phoebe,
can
you
hear
can
you.
hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear Peter?
Yes, I can hear Peter in the background.
Oh, you can hear Peter in the background. They hear.
Okay. Yeah, we can
my
hear both
speaker.
of you.
It was my phone that got kicked out.
Okay.
All right, carry on.
All right. So basically, a way to work interactively, a nice thing to understand is that you could turn up overall quality and turn down all the quality settings here and get a faster responding, interactive mode, while still you could get the progressive response. So in the output window here, you can see that we're rendering. And you notice now that the interactivity, I'm going to let it sit and progress to a higher quality. So the interactivity is faster because my initial overall sampling, this is closer to what we call brute force path sampling. My initial qualities are fairly low, and I'm able to work interactively in my scene pretty quickly because we're not doing a lot of local indirect sampling, for example, or glossy and specular reflection or transmission, and we're just throwing all that extra work into the overall quality sample setting of how many eye rays we're picking out. But this gives us, for interactive work within the window, this gives us an ability to bring in the render fairly quickly and then let it resolve over time while we're considering lighting decisions. So it's a way of working that is pretty valuable, hopefully, for you, now that I've demonstrated it for you. Again, putting down, I like to set this at 0.1 or 0.2. And this is actually, how well this works kind of depends on how many CPU cores you have and how the power of your GPUs are. I notice even on my laptop, having my GPUs on my laptop, sometimes I like to set this a little higher than 0.1, and it really is a balance in how your hardware works. And so this is something we can talk about on the forum on how to get your interactivity up based on your machine configuration. Okay, so again, the render resources, I'm going to go back and take a look at render resources because we wanted to point out one other thing, and that is our satellite configuration. So here, not only does this control the number of cores and threads you're using in all the different render modes. Again, this is the current frame render, this is interactive IPR type render, and IPR render and the viewport renderer are lumped together, and then there's batch rendering here. And then you're controlling the number of GPUs you're using. But this is just for all the resources that are local. Then the resources that are external to the machine you're working on are satellite resources. And here, instead of the old .ray hosts file that people may have remembered from the past, we've actually made a nice little UI to help you add satellites and use them. Now, the actual satellite machine will require a Mentor license to be able to do satellite rendering. But again, we've made this much faster. And I think one of the other things, I don't remember if you talked about this, but a one mental ray license can serve any type of mental ray render, and that is a significant difference that we now have. In other words, a mental ray license can cover batch rendering or sequence rendering inside of Maya. It can cover a satellite or standalone render. It can cover a headless, the capital render -R MR kind of render for Maya. And so, again, a single render license can serve any way of using mental ray on a node. And so that's kind of a powerful concept as far as the licensing is concerned. And again, I'm showing you that we can use any satellite out there for every node of satellite you use, even if this is you're basically running here in the UI. The headless ones out there that you're running, the satellites that you're running will require licenses, just to make a point. But we are making satellite better and easier to use, just so you know. Okay, so I covered some basics in Mila material. I covered some satellite kind of spread everywhere. This is mostly an overview. And Peter, do you see, is there any big questions you think coming from any of those questions that somebody wants? I'm going to kind of open it up. There's about 10 minutes left. If there's some really common, if somebody's asking a question over and over, we'll probably address some of your questions at this point in time. Again, we're going to give you mostly overview. Okay.
Hey Bart, I just got a quick question.
Phoebe's asking some. What was that?
Can you use satellite as a student license?
The student license, you can connect up to, in other words, this is a good question, can you use satellite for a student license? The student license can run the host or the main local mental array for Maya, but for each satellite that you have out there, there's a license required for each one of these satellites that you add. So, for example, if a school had a render farm with 5 nodes on it, the student could use the mental array on their system and then go out and get the 5 nodes off the render farm and use those.
But it's important to remember that our EDU licenses are only available to institutions. So strictly speaking, there isn't really a student license anymore. It's only if you're in school, and the school actually has the licenses.
Were you all able to hear Peter on that? Just because of Phoebe, did you hear that?
I can hear it.
Okay, right. So yes, many people are asking us for student licenses. Everybody gets this, what I demonstrated here, for free, and educational institutions can apply for their licenses. Right. So is there another common question out there?
All right, so here's an iRay question. Is there an iRay plugin available for Mac? And the answer is yes, but only by product, and that would be for Cinema 4D.
So, and again, that's Cinema 4D, just repeating what Peter said.
Right. Mental Ray is available for Mac, though.
Mental Ray, yes, just to be clear, this thing that I'm showing you here runs on Linux, on Mac, and Windows, all 3 platforms.
Okay, let's look for another question. Are there any Mohammed is asking, hi, are there any course or full tutorial available for Mental Ray in Maya 2017? Not yet, but we're working on it.
That brings up something, though, that I want everybody to understand, and that is, I know some people don't necessarily know that there's documentation that we've been starting a big project rewriting for Mental Array for Maya, and you may not be aware of where it is. If you've installed on Windows, for example, you can get it from the Start program. It's under NVidia Corporation Mental Array for Maya 2017, for example. It's called the Plugin Manual, and this is the user doc that's kind of task-oriented. We started with some basic, and we'll add more intermediate and advanced features for that as we go. And in this version that I'm showing you here, that again, you can beta test. This is version 1.01. There's just a quick link here straight from our toolbar, and I think I have to share this explicitly.
Yeah, you guys on the webcast can see this, but it's on the webpage. Okay.
Conference
So here's another question. Joe is asking, does the Pro price for 5 licenses mean that you have to have 5 Pro cards to qualify, or just 1 Pro card to get 5 licenses at that price? The answer is that the Pro card licenses are actually node locked. So the answer is yes. If you licensed one machine with a Pro card in it, and you took that Pro card and put it in another machine, well, that license will no longer work. However, one thing that's important to note is that if you don't have Pro card licenses, you get the other kind of license. Those are actually network licenses. They can be set up to be served from a single computer on your network, or they could be set up on the same machine to serve a license to the same machine. Okay.
Hey, Bart.
I can't hear the moderator any longer.
Phoebe,
Yeah.
What, you have one, Phoebe?
Oh no, I was just seeing some feedback from the chat box that saying if we can share the samples that we run during the live demo in high resolution and send it out after the webinar.
they're asking if we can share the images that we're creating here
Right.
and send them. Oh, you want to see the higher? They want to see the higher res quality.
Right.
Okay. Do you have any on that system?
The question before let me see if I can actually print screen. Actually, for example, this one that I have right now, I'm going to use a print screen on, and I will give this to you, Phoebe, and we'll figure out if there's a way to do this. I don't know if the web capture itself has high enough quality to see what we're seeing here on my machine. So that's a fairly good question. We'll try to address it a little bit later.
Okay.
All right, I got another question.
Go ahead, Peter.
So Puneet asks, is the interactive renderer viewport, is it available only for Maya 2017? And the answer, Bart, is?
No, you can also get it for Maya 2016. So in other words, this plugin is available both for Maya 2016 and for Maya 2017.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Phoebe, do you have another question?
Yes, I just saw a question coming in. Is NVIDIA going to plan to sell only Mental or the possibility both Mental and Maya plugin? Sorry, Iray plugin.
So is NVIDIA planning to sell? I'm going to state it as it's kind of a question to ask, Peter, but it's kind of a different answer. But is NVIDIA planning to sell Mental Ray
only, or
Mental Ray only, or are they also
included
going to
for
offer
Maya, Mental and Iray together?
You already offer Iray plugins.
And did you hear that? We already offer Iray plugins for Maya.
So
is that clear?
If you go to the URL that we have in the slide deck, you can find the Iray plugin download as well.
Okay.
So we have a product called Iray for Maya.
Right. I encourage everybody to go and download that any of the Iray plugins for Maya, for Max, for Rhino, for Cinema 4D. Those plugins are available on a trial. You can download it and use it for 90 days straight before you need to license it.
Okay, and I also see another question coming in. Is there a functional differences between production licensing and pro licensing?
A functional difference between production licensing and pro licensing?
Yes.
A production license comes in two forms. One is the pro license, and one is the network license. The pro license just ties to your card, and the network license ties to a license server. So those are both options for production, for the production rendering.
Yeah. I think we already answered that one.
But just to clarify, in case
we only got a couple of minutes left.
There was something regarding Mental Ray and Iray and GPU, CPU, and I thought I'd clear that up because that was a little bit asked at the very beginning as well. Iray runs both on CPU and GPU, and again, Mental Ray runs both on GPU and CPU. You can consider Mental Ray to be a GPU accelerated software renderer, whereas Iray is a GPU renderer that also runs on CPU.
Well, more specifically, Iray is a software renderer that runs equally on CPU and GPU. It doesn't. It can run on either individually or in tandem.
Yes, but there is confusion out there that people think that Iray is just GPU, and it is not. It runs on CPU.
That is a common. That's a common myth we're trying to dispel. It's a software renderer that is parallelized, and it runs equally well on CPU and on GPU. In fact, one of the main features of Iray is that in any of our Iray plugins, you can choose what hardware to run your renders on, just like the resources panel inside of Mental Ray.
In fact, we took some of the inspiration from the Iray for Maya resources panel to do the one in Mental Ray.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly what Bart said.
All right. Thanks, Bart and Peter. As time close toward the end of the webinar, there's some other information I'd like to share with the audience. Peter mentioned earlier that NVIDIA Quadro GPUs are designed for professional to accelerate workflow. So besides adding or upgrading your current system with the Quadro GPUs, our authorized partners, as you can see right now, Box, Puget, and Rave, now offering pre-configured rendering machines, as well as large quantity of mental array licenses at a discounted price. So feel free to check out their websites or reach out to them directly for more details. All right, this concludes today's webinar. The recording, again, will be available to you via email, along with the links that we mentioned during the webinar and some other additional information. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.